Who showed up for geography that day. September 12, 1974, Valerie Banks and her backpack were the only ones in class. A court had just ordered the city of Boston to desegregate its public schools. The court said Boston had to begin busing white kids to black schools and black kids to white schools, an effort to force the schools to integrate. Lots of families from white neighborhoods in Boston balked at the idea of sending their kids to school in traditionally black neighborhoods. They balked especially at having black kids come to what had been all-white schools. And so that's how young Valerie Banks ended up in the geography classroom all by herself. The first day of school under that court-ordered busing program. White parents just flat out refused to send their kids to school if there were going to be black kids there too. Within a year and a half of busing starting in Boston, a third of white kids got taken out of Boston public schools. And it is painful to see that young girl sitting all by herself in that classroom. But it only got more traumatic for kids like Valerie from there. Black students on their way to school were the target of big racist mobs in Boston, often really violent protests by white people in Boston. They threw rocks at the kids while they got on the bus. Black kids had to duck shattering glass coming at them through the bus windows as the buses were attacked. Here's a woman screaming at a bus full of black children who are being taken home after school. The photographer said she was yelling to those little kids, "Go home and stay home," yelling at the little kids. People walked through black neighborhoods in Boston wearing Ku Klux Klan gear. They set a mannequin of a black person on fire, an effigy. This is a building in a white neighborhood in Boston, a message for all the black kids, all the black students being bussed in to see on their way to school every morning. We blurred what the word is, but you know what the word is. The trauma those kids had to endure, it would be almost unbelievable if there weren't the pictures to prove it.
I remember riding the buses to protect the kids going up to South Boston High School, and the bricks through the window, signs hanging out those buildings, "Go home," pictures of monkeys, the words, the spit. People just felt it was all right to attack children.
I had no idea what to expect, busing thing. I didn't know anything about South Boston. I didn't know anything about, they didn't like us. I didn't know anything that was in store for us. But when we got there, it was like a war zone. I came back and I told my mom, and I never forget, I said, "Ma, I am not going back to that school unless I have a gun." Exactly. At 14 years old, I am not going back to that school.
That overt racism, those racist attacks in Boston over busing, it took years before any of that simmered down. But scars for those who lived through it never faded away. Boston remains an incredibly unequal place to live by just about every metric. In 2015, the net worth for a white family living in Boston was roughly $250,000. Net worth of a black family living in Boston was an average of $8. The Boston Police Department is 65% white, even though white people make up less than half the city. That's still today. If you look at what the city itself is investing in, where they're doling out lucrative contracts of the more than $2 billion handed out by the city between 2014 and 2019 in contracts, 0.5% of those contracts went to black-owned businesses. And you see it in representation at the highest levels, too. The mayor of Boston has only ever been a white man for all time. For the last 91 years, that white man has been either of Irish or Italian descent, full stop. 91 straight years of Irish American or Italian American men. The city of Boston has never been represented by a black person at the highest level. The city has never been represented by a woman until now. This is Kim Janey. Her family has lived in the Boston neighborhood of Roxbury for 6 generations. When she was 16 years old, Kim Janey became a mom while she was still in high school. After she graduated high school, she started a community college. She ultimately enrolled at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. She worked a job cleaning bathrooms while she was a student at Smith so she could afford tuition and to provide for her daughter. She then spent years as an organizer, an advocate, pushing to reform Boston's public schools. 2017, she was elected to the city council in Boston. She was chosen by her peers then to become the city council's president. That choice was made last year. And as city council president, well, there she was, in place. That is how this week Kim Janey became mayor of Boston. The last mayor of Boston, Marty Walsh, just resigned to become President Biden's labor secretary. When the mayor resigns, the line of succession in Boston is that the president of the city council gets automatically elevated to be acting mayor. That makes Kim Janey, as of this week, the first black person to lead the city of Boston, the first woman to lead the city of Boston. She was also one of those Boston kids in the 70s who was pelted with rocks and racial slurs on their way to school. Kim Janey was 11 years old when she got on those desegregation buses in Boston. She was bused to a school in the same part of Boston where they set that mannequin of a black person on fire. Yesterday, she went back to that school that she was bused to in 1976. She went back, this time on her first full day as the mayor of Boston, Massachusetts.
As a girl growing up in Boston, I was nurtured by a family who believed in me and surrounded by good neighbors who knew my name. It was my village. But when I was just 11 years old, school busing rolled into my life. I was forced onto the front lines of the 1970s battle to desegregate Boston public schools. I had rocks and racial slurs thrown at my bus simply for attending school while black. And just yesterday, on my first full day as mayor, I visited my childhood alma mater. I saw students happy to be back in school with their teachers and friends instead of the pain and trauma that I had experienced in middle school. To think that my teenage grandsons were born at a time when there had never even been a black woman on our city council. And today, my 6-year-old granddaughter, Rosie, and other little girls can see themselves represented in Massachusetts' highest court, the halls of Congress, and now in the 55th mayor of Boston.
The new mayor of Boston, Massachusetts, Mayor Kim Janey, joins us live here. Next, stay with us.